Brilliant. Thank you so much for everyone's time. I know sometimes giving up, it doesn't sound like a lot, but actually an hour and a half is quite a lot of time to give up in the evening, especially people have got busy lives, uh, difficult time with dinner. So hopefully people have managed to um, get a little something inside them to keep them going. Um, Thanks to Joe and Jeanette for putting this session on and for getting me involved in this. But we know that this is an area that a lot of people in sports and physical activity are looking to find out a bit more information about. For some people, this term neurodiversity, there'll be people on the call that know a lot about this and a lot about those conditions, but there'll be some people on the call that sort of, might not necessarily know much about it and are sort of looking to hear a bit more about what that means and, what if somebody joins our club that might identify as having certain neurodivergent conditions? How can we as our club maybe help that person whilst they're at our club? So we'll move forward. This is going to be a bit of the agenda today. We'll do a bit of housekeeping. Joe's done most of it at the start there, but I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to where I work. Really, I'm part of what's called the Sport Welfare Officer Network, but I'll do a little bit of an introduction shortly. Do a bit of an introduction to neurodiversity. We'll talk about some of the most common neurodivergent conditions. We'll talk about what are the benefits of orienteering for people with neurodivergent conditions. What are some of the challenges that people with some of these conditions might face, and how we can support them. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion and key takeaways. And there'll be parts as we go on where I might ask people to give some suggestions or answers. I was going to say feel free to unmute, but I think are we saying just the chat? Joe, Jeanette, what's I can see Joe's unmuted.
Yeah, I'd say just for the main part of the presentation, just pick from the chat, and I'm sure that Jeanette can give you an assist on that.
Brilliant. So please feel free to get involved and share experiences. That sort of makes it that much of a much more enjoyable and sort of this knowledgeable session where we can all share our experiences. But as it says, there, ask questions, respect each other's knowledge and opinions. As I said, there'll be people on the call with different levels of awareness and experience. Be mindful of others' experiences. There might be people on the call that themselves have some neurodivergent conditions. So again, it's just about being respectful. Only share what you feel comfortable sharing. Be mindful of confidentiality. Enter with an open mind. The fact that you're here anyway, it shows that people have got an open mind. But there might be some people out there that, I don't know, there seems to be sometimes on social media sort of maybe sort of negative views about people that might identify as having neurodivergent conditions, or people thinking, well, it wasn't like that back in our day. Why are so many people got these things today that weren't around back then? Chances are they probably were around back then, but weren't necessarily being diagnosed. And just the last one, we're not here to learn how to diagnose. So the aim of today isn't to sort of for you to go away and be like, oh, there's someone at our club that I want to see if maybe they match some of the things that are going to be spoken about today. That's not the intention for today. This is just sort of this for me to explain who I am really, and what's who am I to be sat here today sort of talking to you about this, and just sort of to put out there from the start, I'm not someone that does have neurodivergent conditions. I'm not someone that identifies as having any sort of condition like ADHD or autism. But I do have sort of a keen interest in this area, and I've worked with a lot of people that do have conditions like autism or other neurodivergent conditions. I was a residential worker for young people with disabilities. Then I moved into social work. I was a safeguarding officer and manager at the Football Association, and I now work at this place called London Sport, which is part of the Sport Welfare Officer Network. And I'm just going to tell you a very little bit about us. Because we want people to know about us, and that we're here to offer advice and support. And essentially, we exist because of the sport of gymnastics. If anyone knows about something called the White Review, which took place in 2022, it was a review into the sport of gymnastics that identified that there was still sort of a number of abusive practices taking place within the sport. A lot of people involved as volunteers in gymnastics that didn't necessarily have the skills or awareness to know what they should be looking out for from safeguarding and welfare perspective, how to report concerns, and a result of that review was for roles to be put in across the country called sport welfare officer, sport welfare officers, and we help local clubs, grassroots clubs, and physical activity groups just with their sort of safeguarding and welfare. And we put on training, we put on sessions, we can come and visit clubs, we can come and be a non-judgmental ear to listen to any sort of concerns or share advice. And all of the support that we offer is free because it's funded by Sport England and the National Lottery. So even though I work at London Sport, there'll be people on the call from all over the country. So this is an England-based network, just to say. But if for anyone based in any other parts of England, there are people out there that will be your local sport welfare officer, and I'll share information at the end about how you can reach out to that person if you wish to. And yeah, we always love hearing from clubs and coming to sort of offer help and support and seeing if there's anything that we can do. Maybe put on a session at your club about a particular subject. There might be people after the session's day, people might be thinking, well, look, something like that would be really great for the rest of our members to hear. I wonder if Billy or our local sport welfare officer can come and do that just for our club, and that's the sort of thing that we can do. So I'll share a bit more information about that at the end. But enough about that for the minute, because that's not really what we're here for, and we'll crack straight into what we are here to talk about, which is sort of neurodiversity. And I just wanted to ask people out there, what do people out there know about sort of neurodiversity? So actually, do people have experience of this term? Do people have sort of maybe family members or friends that might identify as having sort of any sort of neurodivergent conditions? So I'll just leave a minute or two just for people to chuck in the chat, and please do put anything that you might know about this term, maybe any famous people you might know, or any popular culture references. Equally, for some people, it might be, do you know what, nothing. I don't know anything about this. So I'll just leave a few moments there and see what we get back. And I will need either Jeanette or Joe to potentially act as my chat decipherers.
We've got a few things coming in, Billy. We've got Jane, who said that it can run in families. Doug has said that he's diagnosed autistic and can get a tremendous amount of help from organisers of events, which is great to hear.
Oh, that's brilliant. And maybe if Doug's happy to, maybe sort of as we go on or later on, we can hear about some of those things, because there might be other clubs out there that think, oh, if those clubs have managed it, maybe we can manage that too. So thank you for sharing that, Doug.
Christine says, my daughter is ADHD undiagnosed, although does have therapy. Vanessa, my entire family is neurodivergent. Do you want me to keep reading, or do you want to comment on these as they come through?
No, I'll keep going. Like I sort of, yeah.
An umbrella term covering many diagnoses, e.g. ADHD and autism. Oh, and Doug's very kindly said it would be a pleasure to explain to others. So that's great, Doug. We'd love to have your input.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. No, that's great. It sounds like there are people out there that sort of are quite au fait with this kind of topic, and yeah, if we can have people going away with a few sort of tips about, well, actually, what can we do at our club, or yeah, then that'd be really great to hear about that a little bit later. But in terms of what sort of neurodiversity is, as a very sort of simple definition, we're talking about it referring to the natural variations and the different ways that brains process information. So the term neurodiversity essentially recognises the vast range of neurological differences that make up human experience. Really, brain functions and behaviours are they're changes and differences in those things that are natural, and we should embrace them. And actually, just sort of recognising this term neurodiversity helps us as a society really to recognise that it's people do think differently, people do think in diverse ways, people learn differently, people interact differently, and there's not necessarily a go-to normal way that people's brains necessarily work. So it really just highlights the differences that in the brain, really. And in terms of the word neurodivergent, that's a word that we would often use to refer to people themselves whose brain functions differently, or processes or behaviors differ from what is considered typical or neurotypical. So there's another terminology there, neurotypical, that we might use to refer to someone that doesn't have any sort of neurodivergent conditions. The temptation might be to use that word normal or something like that, but actually it's a much more sort of friendly term. I would say that for myself, I would describe myself as neurotypical. And we had someone that did mention sort of autism and ADHD in the chat, and certainly there are a couple of conditions that we will be talking a bit more about. And I've also chucked in this term at the bottom, neurospicy. And there might be some people on the call that are thinking, what's he talking about, neurospicy? But essentially, that's just a word that some people who might identify as having a neurodivergent condition or ADHD or autism, sort of their own way of sort of owning that word, because these people that might have these kind of conditions may for many years have been seen as wrong or different or bad. And actually, it's just a way for someone to sort of use a term that sort of they're owning their condition. I've got a colleague at work that refers to herself as neurospicy, and it's sort of just it sort of it works for her to use that description. I probably wouldn't use it to describe someone. I probably wouldn't, as a neurotypical person, use it to describe someone. It's probably a word that someone with a neurodivergent condition would use to describe themselves. But it's just a bit of that sort of fun way to describe yourself. A few other sort of fun words that I came across as well: neurodistinct, neurowonderful, neurosparkly, neurodefiant. So again, it's just sort of, it's more about ownership, really, as I see it. It's a fun and creative way to express one's differences and sort of claim that identity, really. It might have been sort of harmful stereotypes years ago, some of these conditions are viewed as such by some people. So hopefully people go away with a new term learnt there anyway, with neurospicy.
Billy, can I just jump in?
Yes, please.
Sorry, because Danny's put on the chat that he's neurodivergent and he deals with disability accessibility issues as part of his job. So it'd be interesting to get some feedback from Danny. And he's put, neurodiversity is the idea that there are different kinds of brains and not a single correct type, inspired by the term biodiversity.
Is it? Okay, that's interesting to know. Oh, thank you, Danny. I really appreciate people jumping in and sharing things like that, because as I said, I'm not the expert in this field. I'm someone that takes a keen interest and wants to sort of help share awareness around there, but would never sell myself as being the go-to expert in this field necessarily. So hopefully we can get back.
I know it's no, sorry, I put that because I know it's been, I can't remember where I read this, but it's been said that, I think it was a disability rights activist who came up with the term, and they said that they were inspired by, like, an environment is biodiverse because the environment has lots of different organisms in it and they're not all the same, so it's kind of like that.
It completely, yeah, now that you said it, it sort of completely makes sense in terms of that sort of might be where it's potentially came from. So really appreciate you sharing that, Danny. Thank you. These are a few sports people that I'm sure people recognise. And actually, I'm going to ask people in the chat, sort of, if there's any faces that you recognise, chuck the name in the chat. And all of these people have got diagnosed neurodivergent conditions. But I just want to see if there might be the odd person that people don't know. But there's a few sort of quite famous faces. Have we got some? Let me see if I can get it up. I might be able to get the chat up myself, actually. Does that stop sharing by me doing that?
Nope, still okay.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, so we've got Steve Redgrave. Steve Redgrave has dyslexia, so we'll be talking a little bit about dyslexia over the next sort of couple of slides. Simone Biles, yeah, best gymnast ever, I think it's fair to say. She has ADHD. Any more? Any other recognizable faces?
My chat's not working, but you got Lucy Bronze there, who's got autism.
Yeah, two for two there. Got the name and the condition. Yeah, absolutely. Michael Phelps. Yeah, so Michael Phelps sort of got ADHD. Sometimes some of these terms, like, it's not to say that someone doesn't have more than one thing. It's not a rule that you can only have one of these conditions. But I think he's sort of as come out and spoken about his sort of ADHD. Tim Howard, he's a sort of an ex goalkeeper for Manchester United and the United States of America. He has Tourette's syndrome. People hear sort of the term Tourette, and you sort of naturally, I think, jump to certain conclusions about what that looks like, or how people with Tourette syndrome might respond. But we'll talk a bit about that as well as we go on. And then James McLean, yes, so he's a current footballer. He was playing at Wrexham at one point, but was playing for Ireland. He's got autism. And who else have we got? Let's go back to our screen. We've got a golfer. The female golfer top right is Charlie Hull. She's sort of one of Britain's top golfers. Has ADHD. And I think that's everyone. So I think people had were able to recognise most people there. And we're going to talk about all of those sort of different conditions that we mentioned over the next few slides. And specifically there, we've got Lucy Bronze, and just got a quote that she came out with, that something that is really good for for her ADHD and autism is exercise. So for her, having that focus, something to do and keeping moving, and for her it's less passionate. It's an obsession. That's her autism and her hyper focus on football. And that term hyper focus is something we'll come back to later as well, in terms of why actually some people that might have ADHD or autism, having that hyper focus, being able to really, really focus on something, potentially gives, you could argue, potentially gives that person an advantage in that moment, because all their focus is on improving that skill, that technique, getting better, being the best that they can. And having that hyper focus can really help sometimes in those kind of situations.
Billy, just to jump in, Doug's put on the chat that he hasn't got autism. It is him, and so correct me if I certainly am making mistakes as I'm learning more about neurodiversity. But you're right, you don't say that somebody has got autism. Is it right to say that they are autistic? It's making sure your terminology is right, which is tricky, but that's a good point.
Doug, is that okay? Do you want to jump in there with that? Is that sort of what you were referring to? So I think you're right. Language is so important, and okay, we've got that's right. And just a few sort of statistics for people. It's suggested that between 15 and 20% of adults in the UK are thought to be neurodivergent. Certainly, when I saw that, I was surprised it was that high. Some people might be less surprised. That sort of academic research from Birkbeck University. About 10% of the UK population having dyslexia. Again, I'm sort of thinking back to my days at school, and probably that feels about right in terms of maybe being in a class of 30 and maybe 3 people having dyslexia, perhaps. And certainly probably dyslexia is probably, other people might disagree, but I think probably we've known more about dyslexia for longer than perhaps some of these other conditions. That might just be my perception, but I feel like certainly when I was younger and at school, there would be discussions around dyslexia, whereas I don't really think we were talking too much about things like ADHD, sort of 30 plus years ago when I was at school. And last one, sort of 5% of school-aged children having an ADHD diagnosis. And it certainly feels like sometimes, I mentioned earlier about sort of coming in with a sort of an open mind, and there might be some people thinking that children left, right, and centre are being diagnosed with ADHD, and is it a case that more children today have ADHD compared to years ago? Well, certainly in terms of diagnosis wise, yes. But as I said at the start, I think a lot of those behaviours would have been around back then, but we didn't necessarily have the understanding, the language, and those sort of diagnoses weren't being carried out. And I know someone on the chat at the start referenced that I think they said their daughter had sort of undiagnosed ADHD, and I know that for some people getting that diagnosis can be so hard just because of how long waiting lists are to be seen by GPs or experts. Actually, for some people, that whilst labels aren't necessarily always helpful, that label might be really helpful in terms of getting additional education support, things like that. I don't know, I've got family members that having to pay thousands of pounds to get these diagnoses, to sort of be seen privately because of sort of waiting lists, just because they need that diagnosis for their child to be able to get appropriate sort of education. So I know it's a difficult thing that a lot of people might have to go through with children that might have some of these conditions that are waiting for that diagnosis. So we'll talk a little bit about some neurodivergent conditions now, and I selected these pictures, and they're obviously they're massively inflating sort of some of the conditions as such, but they're just trying to represent in one still what potentially it might feel like for some people that are neurodivergent. And we'll start off with sort of ADHD, which we often hear it broken down just as ADHD, but that stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. So actually, those terms attention and hyperactivity are quite important as we go on to sort of talk about what that means. And essentially, it's like all of these conditions, it's a condition where the brain works differently to most people. So sometimes children and young people and adults as well might have trouble with things like concentrating, sitting still for a long time. Probably back in the day, those are the children would have been seen as naughty or disruptive, but actually in society today we're more able to recognize that actually it's not necessarily that child is naughty, it's because their brain is working differently, and it's harder for them to conform perhaps to the norms that we would expect. With ADHD, symptoms tend to start before the age of 12, and it can potentially involve a person's ability to pay attention being reduced. So they might be inattentive, they might have high energy levels, so therefore they might be hyperactive, as referenced in the terminology. And just sometimes it might involve difficulties with being able to sort of control their impulses, so potentially them being impulsive. But what I would say for all of these conditions is that they will be different for every single person. It's not to say that these are one-size-fits-all labels, and that just because one person has ADHD and they feel one thing or behave in a certain way, that someone else is going to behave and feel the exact same thing is probably unlikely. So some signs that a young person might have ADHD, for example, being easily distracted, finding it hard to listen to what people are saying and to follow instructions, sometimes forgetting sort of everyday tasks like brushing your teeth or getting your socks on before you go into school. But they could also be sort of showing signs of being hyperactive and impulsive, as we said, having high energy levels, lots of fidgeting, tapping hands and feet. We saw a few years ago there was you saw fidget toys everywhere. You see them a bit less nowadays, but actually we have them at work where I work. We've got a box of sort of fidget toys, and we encourage people to take them into meetings, because for some people, just having something to do with your hands, even if you don't not necessarily have ADHD, but for some people it's just doing something with your hands just gives you something to do and puts a focus into that, and actually you could for some people it then helps their focus on the matter at hand, rather than tapping the table, tapping a pen, for example. Some other things young people might, or adults as well, might talk noisily. That can sometimes be a sign of ADHD. Feeling restless, finding it hard to wait their turn, interrupting conversations. And actually, my research shows that most children and young people with ADHD have symptoms of both the sort of the inattentive side of ADHD as well as the hyperactive side of ADHD. But equally, some people might show only one type of ADHD. It's often recognized less in girls than boys. And actually, I've certainly read a lot about more adults being diagnosed with ADHD later in life, and that perhaps if they had been diagnosed earlier, that they might have had more support when they were growing up. But yeah, so some people finding out in their 30s, 40s, 50s that they've got this diagnosis, and that can be really helpful for some people to know, actually, well, that's why my brain is always going crazy. It feels like it's always going crazy. That's why I struggle to switch off, for example. And I did this session a few weeks ago, and somebody said that actually they have ADHD, and for them it's about attention. It's more about attention deficit, and they don't show themselves as being hyperactive, but they said it's not to say that their brain doesn't feel hyperactive a lot of the time. So just because someone isn't displaying certain hyperactivity or certain aspects of ADHD doesn't mean that inside they might not be feeling that or experiencing that in some way. Was there anything in the chat about ADHD? Or before I move on to talking about anything else?
Doug just made reference to when you were talking about people doing things with the hands and movements. It's known as stimming. I believe that's what it's known as. Yes,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I remember, having worked with a lot of young people with autism and as a residential worker, absolutely. For some people, it can be something they're doing because they're restless, but for some people, it's also quite stimulating. And I would, I can't say with certainty, but I'm going to suggest stimming might come from stimulation, and that sort of that movement in front of the eyes, perhaps. It can also be like a sensory kind of movement that for that person feels they're doing it. It's for them. It's either it's a nice sensory feeling, or it's a way of sort of calming them or making them feel bringing them back down to earth, so to speak. But thank you, Doug, for sharing that. We'll move on to talk a bit about autism spectrum disorder. Some people simply refer to it as autism, and I think that's fine as well. But it's sometimes can be useful just to sort of remember that we are talking about a spectrum. So some people can be people can be on different levels of the spectrum. Some people being of a very high ability and able to sort of explain about how their autism impacts them. So on the other end of the scale, people that have autism and as a result maybe a non-verbal. I used to care for people that had young people with severe autism that weren't able to speak, weren't able to control toilet movements, things like that, weren't able to care for themselves. So it's such a big spectrum, really, and people can be people might be anywhere along that line of that spectrum, but it's a lifelong developmental condition, and essentially it affects the ways that people communicate, interact, the way that people process information. And as I said, with ADHD, the symptoms can be different for different people, but some of the more common sort of characteristics being just different ways of how people communicate and understand and interact with each other, experiencing sights, sounds, smells, tastes differently. I mentioned sort of that stimming in front of your face perhaps, or moving things in front of your eyes. We had a sensory room where I used to work that had lovely lights going off, lava lamps kind of things, and actually for a lot of young people, people with autism, that was something that was, again, stimulating, relaxing, and for them, they were potentially seeing it in a way that I wasn't seeing it. For them, perhaps, and I say perhaps because I don't know, but perhaps they were seeing it on like another level, another plane that was sort of above and beyond what I was able to see. Sometimes people with autism can find unfamiliar settings and scenarios quite difficult. Sometimes social events, things that they're not used to. People like that can find those events more stressful. And also it shows that actually, there'll be some people out there that don't have neurodivergent conditions or don't have autism, but are maybe thinking, well, I have that as well. Maybe I'm a little bit autistic. And some people, I think it sort of can be quite unhelpful where people sort of almost label themselves as such. But equally, we did say it is that spectrum of maybe a high ability to a lower ability. So there'll be characteristics of some of these things that we might have or might feel that we have. But it's not to say that just because we have one of those things, for example, that means that we are autistic, or that means that we are ADHD. And sometimes that can be quite I wasn't going to use the term offensive, but for want of another word, it could be perhaps offensive to people that do have those conditions and do experience sort of the day-to-day issues that perhaps might limit someone with some of these conditions.
Billy, just to jump in,
please,
so Doug has put on the chat that his ed psych had explained to him that it'd be helpful if he didn't mask, but if it was possible to try to explain how he was feeling, what was happening, which because you just don't know what's going on, do you? So the more that you can explain and understand, amazing.
Absolutely. And just to jump into that, I was going to say the next, literally my next, one of the next words I was going to use was about masking. So some people out there might not know what that means, but actually it's a way that sometimes autistic people can mask their autism or some of their conditions, and they try to act like everyone else around them. So that might make them appear, in certain situations, in certain environments, that they don't have autism, because actually they're doing what everyone else does. It might feel very uncomfortable, very unnatural for them, but actually, for observers, they might not realize that person does have autism, for example. And I know that from my research, and Doug and other people might be able to agree or disagree, but it sounds like masking can be really, really exhausting sometimes if people feel like they've got to present in a certain way or cover up some of their conditions. And it's really great if people are being able to sort of be themselves, essentially, and not having to mask, and actually people around them knowing that someone does have autism or ADHD. And we should want people to be themselves. And if there's anything that we, as supporting people around other people with conditions, can do, and we're going to talk about that as we go on, then that sort of makes life so much easier. I would suggest for someone that might have ADHD or autism or some of these other conditions that we're going to speak about.
Yeah, Billy, Doug said that he stims, but not with his hands in front. Sorry, not with hands in front of my face, but quietly. So you maybe don't actually see that he's stimming, because he's kind of even masking that side of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like there's almost a form of masking. Maybe it's like a subconscious thing, or maybe perhaps not.
And he said that he's been told that he spent most of his life masking, and the down after constant masking is exhausting, which I can imagine it is.
Absolutely, yeah. I've only got to think. I consider myself as a bit of an introverted person, perhaps, and I know that it takes a lot out of me sometimes to go to certain events or social events. So and whilst it's a completely different subject condition, I can perhaps see similarities and recognizing the exhausting nature of that kind of pretense or having to, you know, be someone you don't necessarily feel inside in those moments. So in terms of autism, it's, as we said, it's a very varied condition. No two people with autism are the same. And some people with autism might need more support than others. Some people can lead totally independent lives, whereas some people, as I've said, might need that care and support. And in the past, we often broke down the term autism into sort of other conditions as well. One of which we refer to as Asperger's syndrome. I always said Asperger's, but I think it is Asperger's. But that was the sort of, back in the day, I sort of would understand that term generally to mean someone on the higher level of ability of autism. But actually, it's not terminology, and it's not a diagnosis that people are given today. Actually, people are given that sort of, autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, or simply referred to as autism. So if anyone out there is thinking, well, actually they've heard of Asperger's, yes, that is still a thing, but it's something that's not currently being, we're not currently diagnosing that terminology. But equally, if you're an adult that 20-25 years ago was diagnosed with Asperger's, I'm pretty sure that today you're still going to sort of see yourself as being someone perhaps that has Asperger's, because maybe that's a condition that you were told that you have, and suddenly being given a different name for it might not be helpful for some people, for example. Okay. Dyspraxia. It's a surprisingly sort of common condition, and it's all about sort of movements and coordination, and it's still a condition really that we don't know as much about as we potentially should do. And there are some sort of common signs of dyspraxia, sort of difficulties in coordinating both large and small body movements. Sometimes movements appearing awkward and sort of lacking smoothness. Sometimes for some people it requires extra physical and mental effort to carry out those movements. Sometimes having poor spatial awareness. Some people might be more likely to trip up, to get bumps and bruises, for example. Perhaps difficulties learning new tasks. So if I'm thinking about from a sporting perspective or physical activity perspective, having a new skill to learn can be that much harder for someone that has dyspraxia. Difficulty transferring motor skills to new situations and new activities, and also for some people it also can then step into sort of difficulties with things like organizing themselves, organizing equipment, organizing their thoughts. So for some people that means issues regarding things like attention, memory, time management, and also for some people as well, it's sort of there can be speech and language issues. Some people it might take someone just those few seconds longer to be able to keep up with conversations, or to be able to process what they've heard, or to listen to what they've heard, to process it, and then to respond to what they're going to say. So that there can be delays there because of someone's dyspraxia, and it's estimated that it impacts around sort of 5% of school-age children. And certainly it's a terminology we said we don't know sort of as much as we should know about this subject. And actually just interestingly, my wife is someone that considers that, she wonders whether she has this condition, and is wondering whether it's something that's worth her exploring in terms of getting that diagnosis. But, whilst I can't speak for her, it's not something that stops her in getting on with sort of everyday life. It's not something that's limiting what she does. So I don't know how, in that situation, I don't necessarily know how helpful a label can be. But equally, for that person, it might also mean like, okay, that explains why I'm, I could feel like I'm clumsy, or why I feel like I'm knocking into things. So that's just a little bit about sort of dyspraxia. Dyscalculia I've got next on my list. I'm not going to, some of these ones that we haven't heard of too much, I'm not going to focus on too much, but it's just sort of give us a brief outline. sort of this is when we're talking about sort of numbers, sort of a learning disorder that affects people's ability to understand and work with numbers, sometimes struggling with basic arithmetic, number comprehension, mathematical concepts, difficulty counting, understanding time. So yeah, and there might be some people on the call that think, well, actually, I'm no good at maths. Does that mean I have dyscalculia? Potentially not, but also, potentially there could be something there that is impacting why perhaps somebody is having difficulty with certain calculations or number-based sort of processing. Tourette syndrome. I don't know if anyone, I think I spoke to you, Jeanette, earlier, and you said you had seen it. There was a film that came out, I think it was earlier in the year, called I Swear. Really great film that sort of really highlighted what it was just one person's experience, but actually and I think that generally that film it involved someone that would often use sort of had tics, and for that person it might mean saying swear words, saying offensive words sometimes. And actually there was the news story where I think they're at the BAFTAs and use some inappropriate language, and I'm sure people out there sort of saw the stories about that. But I referenced that one of the pictures that we had up earlier, one of the sports people, one of those people has a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome. So actually it just highlights that, again, the way that I see it, that's almost could be seen as a bit like a spectrum, in that you could have someone can have smaller tics or smaller movements that in this case Tim Howard, the goalkeeper, had, whereas if this was if we refer back to the goalkeeper Tim Howard, would he be able to be a full-time professional goalkeeper if he was someone that had the Tourette's as the person in the film I Swear, who is sort of regularly ticking, jerking movements, swearing? That they would find it a lot more difficult to be able to carry out his role as a professional sports person with those that high level condition. But actually on a lower level, it's something that he was able to manage. I don't know whether that would be with the assistance of medication, perhaps. But yeah, so Tourette's doesn't have to just mean someone that is just constantly, shouting and swearing and unable to keep that in. And I think I remember hearing linked to that, the film I Swear, for the person that the film was based on, it was almost saying that it's almost like trying to keep a sneeze in. That's probably the best way that he could think to describe. He might shout an offensive term or something, but it is not what he's thinking or what he wants to display. It's just this the neurological condition that in that moment the brain is thinking, what's the worst thing that could potentially be said here, and that's unfortunately what could come out in that moment. Was there anything in the chat before I went on to the next one, Jeanette? I can't hear anything, so I will.
Sorry, no, I had my microphone off.
Oh, sorry. I want to say which one. I think I've skipped one, didn't I? Dyslexia. Yeah, so dyslexia, again, I said at the start, I think it's certainly for me, it feels like a term that we've known more about earlier than others. Again, people out there can feel free to disagree. It's just my sort of feeling. And that's, it's a common learning difficulty that's where we're issues with things like reading, writing, and spelling. But yeah, unlike a learning disability, intelligence isn't affected when it comes to dyslexia. And just very briefly, that I've got a sensory processing disorder and language processing disorder. I'm not going to go through those two now, just because I want to keep us to time. But I just want to highlight that there are a number of conditions out there. So if you ever had anyone coming to sort of join your club that came with that identified themselves as having a concern, and you hadn't heard of it, that's not to say that this person is sort of is making it up or chancing it. but yeah, there are conditions out there that that we haven't necessarily heard of, or that we know as much about as we potentially might do it in the future. So that's just a bit of an introduction to sort of the most sort of common neurodivergent conditions. If we're sort of linking it back into sort of orienteering, I sort of put a couple of discussion points in terms of why. Is there any sort of reason perhaps why orienteering might be appealing for neurodivergent people, but also whether there were any characteristics, neurodivergent characteristics that might aid orienteers? I'll just leave a few moments, but for anyone to sort of put any thoughts down.
Jane's already come in with hyperfocus.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's probably a key thing for a lot of sports. That sort of, you know, real folk, like I'm doing this and I'm going to do this sort of with all of my focus and all of my attention, and nothing is going to stop me from doing what I need to do. Essentially, that's sort of how I sort of interpret it. That sort of hyper focus sort of language. Anything else, I wonder? I wonder if there's any suggestions from someone that might themselves identify as having perhaps autism or being autistic, or being neurodivergent. What is it that makes it appealing for yourselves?
Jane's also put that she thinks that clubs are inclusive. Most clubs are inclusive, so they are attractive to a broad spectrum of people already.
Yeah, and actually that's one of my points that I've put here, that I think actually it can be a more welcoming environment compared to perhaps some other sports. So, even like my background is in football, but actually sometimes that can be seen as a bit of a sort of an environment that might, for some people might be seen as macho, or it might be seen as unwelcoming, or where there's levels of banter that people don't like. But actually, I think I certainly see orienteering as being an environment that is welcoming. So I'd absolutely agree with that, Jane.
And Carolyn's put, if you can see patterns and have good spatial awareness, that could be a superpower in dyslexia or dyslexia.
And I think I think some people might often refer to their being autistic or ADHD as a superpower, again, as that kind of reclaiming that terminology, or that reclaiming a condition that previously people might have looked down on someone for having, perhaps, or saw that person as not equal. So I think a lot of people that are autistic or have ADHD might use that terminology like superpower, and similar to how they might describe themselves as being neurospicy, for example.
And then Amanda's put maps are logical problem solving.
Exactly, yeah. I've put that point, that sort of use of maps for planning, following. I guess essentially a map is saying, well, if you do this, if you follow this route, you will get here. There's a clear start and end point, and that it's, if you do it right, in theory, I guess you can't go wrong if you follow it to the letter. I think as well that a lot of sort of repetition is involved in orienteering, in terms of following routes, following guides, and also I've also put that for some people that sort of autonomy and independence might be a reason why orienteering is quite appealing. It's not to say that obviously there are going to be aspects of teamwork and socializing as well, but for some people it's just about, right, I've got my map, got my compass, and I can focus, and I can just crack on. And also for some people it's being outside in that environment, it can be a bit less stimulating or overwhelming than sort of perhaps being inside. Whereas we've got things like phones, screens, other people's conversations, shops, sirens going off. Whereas actually, if you're in forests or woods, this is a much more calming atmosphere. to be involved in sport than perhaps I know there is sort of urban orienteering as well, but yeah, than perhaps compared to some other sports that might take place in the inner city, for example.
Yeah. Mary's just she's put self-paced as individual events and emotional regulation being outside and exercising.
Perfect. Yeah.
Exactly
Yeah. I couldn't have sort of put it better myself. So it just shows that actually there are a number of reasons why somebody who might be autistic or have ADHD or have some of these conditions that we've spoken about, why for them orienteering is going to be somewhere that that they want to be involved. And what about any sort of I think we sort of covered it in the same sort of discussion, but the sort of the neurodivergent characteristics that might aid orienteers. We said about sort of the hyper focus, and I put as well for some people as well, they might have I'm saying extreme versions here, but sometimes for some people that might be autistic, that might mean having a good memory, or for some people it might involve, right, I have to look at that map once, and actually now I have that information stored, I don't have to keep looking at that map again. I'm going to the extreme version of the not quite the Rain Man level of autistic savant, but for some people it might just be that they can perhaps store that information in a different way perhaps than someone who is neurotypical.
Just a few more comments in the chat that are
interesting.
Jane has put that geeking routes, especially after an event. So Billy, you might not know much about this, but after an event's been held, there's a lot of discussion afterwards as to where you went and how you might have done it better. And there's loads of IT systems in place to help you see where you went and things. And that might be very appealing. Amanda's put no fluorescent bright lights, which is true. Apart from the quid games, if you go to the quid games that are starting off, they're a bit more blinging in your face. Doug has put the massive organisation of major events is a total barrier to inclusion, and that's a fair point. And we need to look at how we can change that going forward. He's also got his cup of tea now, so he's happy.
Can I jump in on that point? I know, Jeanette, we've got an article that we're going to share
yes
at some point, either afterwards or during, or a couple of articles, and there was one written by someone, a lady, I think in her 40s, who had a diagnosis of autism quite late in life, and in this article she writes about her experiences of going to a big event like Doug has said, and how actually that can be quite overwhelming, knowing that it's busy, there's lots going on, and perhaps even like the socializing afterwards can be actually quite hard for someone who if you spent all your energy has gone into having to put up with the busyness, not just having lots going on and lots of stimulation, then they don't almost have the energy. Some people don't have the energy at the end to be able to, they would like to, but in this instance she wasn't able to spend the time socializing with people afterwards, or finding out having those discussions that somebody said about at the end, and that could be quite appealing for someone with a neurodivergent condition. So we'll share that article, because it did also reference some tips for clubs about how they can perhaps have like a quieter start zones, or even quieter parking spots for people that sort of just in this instance you just wanted to have a few minutes at the start to focus in her car and sort of get herself in the position where she was ready to get on with her orienteering. But actually in the main car park, where there was lots going on and everyone was having a great time, as they should be, that was just something that for her was hard to do. But having a quiet parking area made that much easier.
Danny's put in the chat, he's put, there is a structure to orienteering, but it isn't the same course every time, so it's more interesting. He also does road and cross country running, which he also likes, but because unlike orienteering, it's always a mass start and no route choice, it feels more pressured than orienteering.
Yeah, I can understand that. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for sharing your experiences there. That's much appreciated. So yeah, so I think we sort of, the main point of this slide was to highlight actually orienteering can be, that sport where people that have some of these that experience some of these conditions are going to be attracted to. And I think, Jeanette, you were saying when I spoke to you earlier, do you want to say what you said about sort of in terms of what the elite people in orienteering? I don't want to preempt what you said.
I've forgotten what I said, to be honest. But I think I might have been talking about, I was on a talk last week from Sport England, and they were saying how you might think that in elite level sport that the number of neurodiversities kind of goes off, and there's not many people with sorry, my watch is talking to me. Sorry, that you might get fewer people with fewer neurodivergents in elite level, but actually it's the opposite to that. And a lot of, as we saw earlier with your examples of sports people, the superpowers that neurodiversities give mean that people in elite orienteers could well be neurodiverse.
So it's exactly that point that you might think, well, actually it's a minority, or it's the grassroots people that potentially might have some of these conditions, whereas actually it's potentially the complete opposite, in that it's potentially those people that are excelling and potentially becoming sort of elite athletes that are, as we've said a few times, that hyper focus, that that ability to just focus on what they need to do to get where they need to be. So thanks, Jeanette. Again, just a few more sort of benefits of orienteering for neurodivergent people. And I think a lot of these we've touched on, so we won't spend too much time on this, but enhanced problem solving, that attention to detail, perhaps increased persistence and resilience. And obviously there'll be some things here, actually, for some neurodivergent people, it might be the opposite of that. But actually, as we've said earlier, people aren't the same that have, that might have the same condition doesn't mean that their characteristics or experiences are always going to be the same. These are just things that for some people might be benefits. It can help social skills. Some people with neurodivergent conditions might have difficulty in socializing, but actually orienteering could be a good way to, because there is a lot of independent work involved, but actually still within an environment where a level of socialization is going to be perhaps required or ideal. Positive physical and mental health outcomes, increased self-esteem and confidence, a real sense of belonging. For some people, some people might have struggled with their diagnoses of autism or ADHD or dyslexia, Tourette's, and actually think there's not a community for them, perhaps, but actually maybe that community can be found in a sport like orienteering. Ability to adapt to new environments. For some people, it's going to be the opposite of that. Some people don't want to, that was wrong language, don't want to, that was not what I meant to say. Some people find it harder to adapt to new environments. So actually for that person, orienteering might not be the sport for them, because actually they need something where they're going to go in every week and it's going to be the same sports hall or the same routine that they go through. A focus on process over perfection, and support for neurodiversity and team dynamics. This was just a quote from the Youth Sport Trust. That despite the potential benefits of physical activity, neurodivergent children are less likely to participate in sports. This disparity highlights the need for inclusion practices to encourage their involvement. So even the fact that people are logging on today, is a really great sign that, because we want all sports clubs, and physical activity groups, including orienteering, to actually be somewhere that is appealing for a child, a young person with some of these conditions. But it looks like at the moment, but the numbers aren't matching or aren't reaching what we're seeing for neurotypical children being involved in sports. So some of the challenges for people that have that are neurodivergent. So I keep remembering what Doug said about it. So maybe it's less about it's being rather than having. So apologies for if I use language that doesn't always align with that. But that's definitely a learning curve for me. But some of the challenges for people that are autistic or neurodivergent, sensory sensitivities. We mentioned that some people are, it's when we spoke about sort of stimming, it's people that might want to sort of be able to stimulate themselves in a way, but actually other things are really going to be off-putting, whether that's noises going on in the forest, or the woods through orienteering, or whether that's through the reflective jackets of helpers or stewards. Actually, and it might sound like very low-level things, but actually for people that have these sensory sensitivities, they can be hard to manage. Essentially, we said about sort of social interaction difficulties, emotional regulation. For some people, just being able to maintain a stance of equilibrium, where they're not in a heightened state, or because they're doing something that they're not used to. That can be really hard for some people, and that's where you might see some people that might do things like that stimming in front of their eyes. I know that for me, sometimes what I sort of only realize this when planning for this session. I will often get, if I'm in a state where I feel like I've got stressed out, or I just need to get into a zone where I need to calm down, I'll get my phone out and I'll play. I've got like a pool game or like a snooker game, and I'll just do like, if I have 10 minutes of doing that, that's my way of, right, just take a few minutes out. It's my time out. And actually that's the way that I manage it. But for some people, it's with that are autistic or have ADHD, that's much harder to do, and it might lead to perhaps difficult behavior or challenging behavior, or what other people might see as a meltdown from that naughty child. Whereas actually, no, it's just that that person that's struggling to, something has happened that either they didn't expect or has gone wrong, or different to what they expected, and they're struggling to keep themselves emotionally regulated. Focus and attention can be a difficulty. We said about sort of motor skills and coordination, unpredictable behavior. I'm sure I speak for most of us. Most of us sort of generally like predictable behavior, and actually unpredictable behavior for someone with neurodivergent conditions can be very difficult to manage. Communication barriers, for some people, especially if we're talking about sort of the autistic spectrum disorder, some people might have difficulty verbalizing what they want to say, or just sort of have verbal speech in general. So that can be a challenge for a lot of people. Self-esteem and confidence. I think these days it's and again, I'm speaking as someone that is not neurodiverse, but it feels like people are getting to a point where they can be more open about some of the some diagnoses, or take ownership or control, be proud of their identity. But maybe for some people it can take a while to potentially get to that position. So self-esteem and confidence can be a challenge for some people. And that behavioral stigma, I mentioned about that, the perceived meltdown by the naughty child, that can be very difficult for not just the young person themselves, but the parent who suddenly thinks, or the other parents are going to be thinking that I'm the bad parent, I can't control my child. But actually, it's that child's neurological condition that is having an impact there. And in terms of sort of understanding why some of these things are important, for ourselves as orienteering clubs, we've got clubs have a responsibility to keep children safe. So I know that I don't know if all clubs do this, but I sort of would encourage all clubs to, when young people are joining the club, giving opportunities for people to either themselves say, look, I experience this difficulty, or I am autistic, I have ADHD, or a parent being able to put that information forward, actually then also there should be sort of further questions asked, I would say, to say, well, actually, okay, it's we know that your child has ADHD. What does that look like? What can we maybe expect? What can we do as our club to make it as easy as possible for that young person to to feel at home here, to feel this is a community for them. So it's not just about knowing that a child has, and it doesn't have to be a child, it can be any participant. It's not just knowing that someone has these labels, but actually what does that mean for them, and what can you do as a club to help. That can then lead into helping to manage and prevent challenging behaviour if you know that child has got that condition, and actually then clubs are able to manage that and to perhaps do a few things at their club that's going to prevent that challenging behaviour. And we'll hear a few things about what clubs are doing in a minute. Do we have to go through all of these? Maximising participant and engagement. If I would say for a club, not just an orienteering club, but any club, I would sort of look to promote a club as being somewhere that is neurodivergent friendly, because actually that means that if I'm out there looking for a club to join, or I'm a parent of a child that maybe has that either a diagnosis or is undiagnosed, but ADHD, for example, if I see that a club is actively puts themselves out there as being neurodivergent friendly, that's going to be appealing for me as a parent to join. And that might just be that it's not that club saying we know everything about all of these conditions. It can just be a club saying, well, look, we know that some people are different, and we at this club are willing to work with you to make your experience here as enjoyable as possible. So I'd always say to a club, is there a way to sort of promote yourself as being neurodiverse friendly? I know we had a few people on the call that sort of might be able to sort of jump in at this point, because I wanted to leave sort of a good sort of 10 minutes or so just to hear, actually, are there things out there that either clubs are doing or have done, or people themselves that are autistic or have ADHD that their club have managed to do for them that's actually made it easier for them? This might be a sort of a good time if anyone wants to sort of unmute, but I really wanted to sort of hear what might be going on out there.
Sorry, Billy, can I just jump in first and say that
Yes.
Obviously at the moment we're just kind of at the beginning of the journey of neurodiversity in well, it started a while back, as the articles in Compass Sport will show you when I send them round to you if you haven't read them already. But we do want to put some guidance out from a national governing body level to make the sport more inclusive. So the more input we have from people, the better the better that guidance will be. So anything that you can say would be really appreciated. And if it's not the right time for sharing it now, then please do contact me on email, because I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, just so that we can get some really good guidance out to clubs. And there is Billy, I don't know whether you've been keeping an eye on the chat, but Doug copied an email that he sends to organisers of events that he's going to, and he explains in it that he is autistic and he doesn't cope easily with crowds and loud noises, and he just makes a request for a few simple things that clubs could do, which would enable it to be a much more pleasurable experience for him and a less exhausting experience. And luckily, well, not luckily, but thankfully, he's had a positive response. I know that his club are brilliant in supporting him, so that is something that I'll definitely be taking to put into the guidance. So thank you for that, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I'm sort of having a read of it now, and it sounds like people have been what word am I looking for? Not receptive to the things that you've sort of put forward and suggested, and that's really good to know that actually, you know, what we'd hate to see is actually, you know, after that message, everyone is coming back saying, well, maybe this isn't the sport for you, or, you know, we're too busy doing this anyway. I think that's really reassuring to hear that actually it sounds like people are brilliant, always had super responses. And actually, because it won't be just you that's feeling that. And actually, if they're making those changes for one person, then actually it's not then hard to make those changes for other people as well. I'm going to read Jane's point. I think what's been important for the autistic boy who regularly comes to our events, he's 19 now, is being welcoming with parents who have to support him as he can't do the course independently. But a few key people that the boy can name and remember. Absolutely, just it sounds like, yeah, being able to partner up with someone that knows the condition that person is experiencing, and that sounds like it's been successful at Jane's club. Oh, junior club cup as well. So exactly, it shows that actually just that little bit of adaptation was all that this, you know, in this instance, it seemed like it was all that one person needed to actually go on to be, you know, potentially one of the, you know, the best juniors at the club. But actually, if that help hadn't been given at the start, then actually that young person, those parents might have thought, well, actually, it doesn't feel like somewhere that we're going to be able to, you know, to thrive. So that's really good to hear. Let's go that during the, yeah. Perfect. I'm just going to read Danny's. One of the things that I think would be good, which I do in my job, is relatively straightforward. Have a visual story to show what attending an event will be like. Yeah, I want to do this for my club's local events, but I'm having trouble getting to people to understand how quick it is to implement. So that could be, in terms of Jeanette, some of the things that you're saying. Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm someone that, although I do some, you know, voluntary work with British Orienteering, I'm not an orienteer, so I wouldn't necessarily know what to expect. So even guides, I was saying this for something else the other day, that even guides that are, in theory, might be meant or created for people might have a learning difficulty or neurodivergent conditions, can actually be also really useful for people that don't have those conditions, but are just a simple way for those people to understand what to expect or what things are going to look like. So that could be something for Danny to perhaps link in with Jeanette or Jeanette to get back to you in the future about. See, some typing's going on, so I'm just going to allow. If anyone wanted to unmute as well, please feel free if there's anything that people wanted to share as well.
I think one of the things in my reading about neurodiversity and how we can make it more inclusive is that it just often starts with a simple conversation with the person to find out what they want and what they need, because it is such a diverse spectrum of behaviours and patterns and understandings. You just need to have that conversation with the person to find out what it is what adjustments you could make for them that could have such a big impact on, you know, their enjoyment of the sport. So yeah.
Absolutely. And Doug's point there that having an organiser state in event information that if people need help, then they only have to ask. And that simple one line, just that helps, that tells something about the culture of that club or event as well, that actually, that, you know, you're inviting people to, you know, give that feedback or want to know a bit more. You know, some clubs or events, they might have been doing things they've been doing for years and years. They don't want to change. They, you know, this is the way we do it, and if you don't want to, you can't do it that way, that's your problem. And obviously that would be a very poor cultural way of doing things. Okay, Doug again saying only have to ask, people are really willing to help, and hopefully that gives some confidence to people on the call that, you know, maybe themselves might have, yeah, identify as having, you know, some of these conditions that we've spoken about, or just it might give, yeah, hopefully give some encouragement for people that are at clubs. You know, if you've got new people joining, just making it as easy as possible for people to, because it could be quite a big thing for somebody to say, look, I actually have autism or I have ADHD. Actually making it as easy as possible for that person to put that information forward. So even if that's in like joining, the application papers or joining papers, is there any, it could be something as, and I'm making this up off the top of my head, as a club, we are very welcoming to people with neurodivergent conditions, and we're always looking to help. So please let us know if any condition such as that applies to you. There'll be a much better way of wording it than that I've just made up on the spot. Again, something like that would make me feel, if I had a neurodivergent condition, that actually this is a club that wants to help, or if I was a parent of a child that had a condition like that.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and they've got auditory processing delay, ADP, okay. Is that right? And they said that when a coach would give them their instructions for an event or a training session, they couldn't remember it. So just having it written down made all the difference to them. And it's quite a simple thing to just, you'll have a copy of your training plan, but to give them a copy so that it's written down so that they don't have to rely on their memory is a really simple thing that you can do that makes the world of difference for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And just lastly on Doug's last point, like it took a number of years before he could actually ask. Again, I don't want to sort of put words into Doug's mouth, but maybe that was to do with sort of the confidence in being able to express that, or not knowing what the response would be. But hopefully with the better understanding that we have about some of these neurological and neurodiverse conditions, that's becoming easier and less of a taboo for people to sort of to talk about. I thank everyone. I really appreciate. I wanted to sort of give time for any sort of good practice or any thoughts to be shared. But we're starting to wrap up. We're sort of coming up to sort of 5 to 8 anyway, and just sort of, I guess, some of the key takeaways that I guess today was only ever going to be like an introduction to this kind of topic. And if anyone on the call does want to talk about this a bit more, or learn a bit more about this, I'm welcome to have sort of further conversations, even for people outside of London, or I'm sure Jeanette's always going to be happy to follow up with people as well. So, but yeah, some of the key takeaways is that being neurodiverse is just a way of describing people whose brains process information differently. Many athletes are neurodiverse, probably more than we think. And it's our responsibility to support them, keep them safe, and keep positive experiences for them to engage in sport. And there can be simple changes that we can make, including to our communication and behaviour, to support everyone, whether we know they're neurodivergent or not. Actually, as we've learned there as well, some of our best athletes could be neurodiverse. So, and again, just for people to take away some thoughts. Is there anything that you can take away from today with the young people that you work with, or I often refer to young people, but actually it's adults as well. When we talk about safeguarding, and we do focus on adults as well. Actually, some of those key points might be, do you ask new members if they are neurodivergent, is there a way of structuring activities differently so that maybe this doesn't refer too much to orienteering, but less noise, less light. Is there a way of sort of taking additional time with certain athletes, if that is someone that has ADHD or autism or dyspraxia, just to help sort of explain the course or some of the instructions for the course. Having like a quiet start area, I think Doug put it in his message that he'd asked about, actually, is there a way, an area to start that might be away from crowds, and just sort of that general reframing of everyone is different, and people's brains are different, and actually just because a child might not be listening or behaving the way that we might hope or expect. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean they're being naughty. It just, it might be that they're, they have, they're just they're finding it that much harder to manage the environment because of a condition that they may have. So again, just some sort of food for thought and things for people to take away. But I really do appreciate people's time that they've given up to be on this call. Just going to leave. I'll send these slides out to Jeanette, who can share them on, just with sort of my contact details. And I'll also put in there in the email, because I don't think people will be able to click on the link here, but if people are interested in finding out about who their sort of local sport welfare officer is, the equivalent of me in your local area, there's ways to find that out. As I said, we'd love to sort of come out and help support people in any way that we can, perhaps putting on some sessions for your club about subjects like this, or coming to sort of see if there's anything that we might come to your club as a neutral pair of eyes and think, actually, have you thought about doing this or that? And we're very non-judgmental with our work. And I'll also send a few links for some more events that we've got coming up through London Sport, which everyone is welcome to attend. But we've got some sessions coming up about things like mental health, getting funding for clubs. So I'll send that out afterwards to Jeanette. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Sort of hand back to Joe. Jeanette, was there anything you wanted to add before handing back to Joe?
No, just to say thank you to everybody. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot, and thank you very much, Billy.
Thank you, Joe.
Jeanette stole some of the words right out of my mouth there. No, a huge thank you, Billy. That was absolutely brilliant. It was great to see everybody so engaged as well in the chat. And there's a lot that I've learned. I've grown up and worked in the background of disability sport. And there's a lot that I've learned. So that's over the entirety of a life that I've learned a lot of things in the past 90 minutes or so. So absolutely fantastic. And yes, a huge thank you to all of you who've attended, and also for having such good discussions as well in the chat. It's as a lot of you know, we do a lot of these webinars, and there's always something that stick out to me for being very, good, very engaged audience. And I think this is definitely up there. So absolutely brilliant. We'll have to get you back, Billy.
I've just seen James put about having an orienteer on the famous athletes photos, and we did have that discussion. I don't think we knew of anyone, but yeah, let us know if there's someone that that we can, if we were to do this again for specifically for orienteering, I'd love to be able to put someone famous in the orienteering world up there.
That'd be excellent. A huge thank you again, Billy, and to everybody for attending this evening. It's summer, or at least spring, when it's still light outside at the end of one of these as well, so you can still make the most of it. So a huge thank you. I know there was a request earlier for somebody who couldn't stick around, but just for those of you who want to either go over the content again, or be able to share this with your clubs or anybody else that the recording of this will go up on the YouTube channel, and it'll also go onto the British Orienteering website as well. So that's about everything from my end. A huge thank you again to Billy and for everybody for attending this evening, and I hope to see you again at another session very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.